Hello everyone, this is Max from Cynical Who, here with another video on, guess what, Doctor Who, and today I'm focusing on particular stories that I feel are underappreciated. Now, there is no disputing that, as is inevitable with any long-running show that people get passionate about, not all of Doctor Who is of good quality. However, there are some adventures that I feel either get too harsh a review or tend to slip through the cracks because the fan base is too busy idolising more classic and well-known stories. With that in mind, here are 10 Doctor Who stories in no particular order that never top the surveys or polls, but that I personally enjoy and feel deserve more praise and recognition than they seem to get for whatever reason. Some of them are carried by their direction and performances rather than their scripts and ideas. Others, meanwhile, I enjoy for nostalgic reasons. But either way, I think they're worth checking out, or re-evaluating if you've only seen them once or haven't seen them for a while. So without further ado, let's get into it. First up on the list, the most recent story that we'll be discussing today is Knock Knock, an episode from back in 2017 that I have fond feelings for. Now, I was left feeling a bit cold by Series 10 when it first came out, as it felt somewhat stale and almost like a sort of holding test card to fill time before Chris Chibnall was able to come in as showrunner. But in hindsight, there are actually quite a few good episodes in this series. Extremists, The Pyramid at the End of the World, The Eaters of Light. But this for me is the standout story of the series, better perhaps than World Enough and Time. I've certainly watched it more often than any other episode in the series. On paper, it may not be the most promising affair, with its haunted house tropes not being particularly new or innovative, but when executed, it really works because of its direction and its performances. Of course, at this point, it would be amiss of me not to mention the great David Suchet, whose performance as the landlord is probably what carries the whole episode. And if you need proof, just watch his final scene in the episode, where we've just had the big twist. To be fair though, all the performances in this one are pretty good. The fellow millennial flatmates are slightly irritating, but I don't know, I've always loved that. Makes them more relatable somehow. In addition, there are some good scary moments, such as when the characters, Harry in particular, get eaten by the woodlouse-like creatures. I mean, they get vomited back out again, which kind of undermines it, but whatever. And last but not least, it features Peter Capaldi as the Doctor, which alone lifts what could have been a very mediocre script to much higher levels. God help me, I can't speak today. One of the more obvious choices on this list next, Destiny of the Daleks. Now, it's not perfect by any means. The production values are somewhat questionable, and to be honest, David Goodson's portrayal of Davros is my least favourite. Compared to any other actor who took on the role, it's like night and day, and Davros' return in the story does undermine his rather brilliant demise in the previous Dalek story that does deserve all the praise it's gotten over the years. But I don't know, I enjoyed the story despite all its flaws. The basic idea of two supercomputers with equal logic locked in stalemate is pinched from perhaps the greatest and most iconic of all sci-fi writers, Isaac Asimov, and treated by script editor and alleged main writer for the serial, Douglas Adams, which perhaps tells you all you need to know about how good an idea it is. There's lots to enjoy here. The film bits that are shot on location look lovely, but then film always does, even though there's obviously a quarry doubling for Skaro. But the best part of this story is probably the performances from the principals. I love how despite the clear production problems, the wobbly sets, other extras perhaps not taking it as seriously as him, the certainty that it might look somewhat dodgy on screen and so on, Tom Baker still gives it his all. In contrast with the rest of Series 17, his Doctor here maintains the perfect balance of comedy and seriousness. Lalla Ward also makes a very good first impression. Look, it's not just because of the costume that I like her in this, alright? She's a very good actress and realises Romana beautifully. And I didn't mean that to say I find her beautiful, alright? Even though she is. Oh, stuff it. Just shut up, alright? Tim Barlow is also pretty good in this, despite being deaf when he played Tyson in this story. On a completely unrelated note, if you're of a certain age, i.e. not a child, I'd like to direct you to a little-known dark comedy from the early 90s called Inside Victor Lewis Smith, which can be watched on YouTube. Here, Barlow plays a hospital patient called Mr. Lobley. I can't show any clips here, unfortunately, but check out the scene 15 minutes into episode 1 where he pesters the matron, played by Annette Badland, aka Margaret the Slovene, about his plan to make millions from the post office. Or, alternatively, check out Mr. Lobley's solo monologue around 16 minutes into episode 6. You'll thank me for it, don't worry. Now we zoom back to the now 15-year-old modern era to look at another haunted house story, this time from the 50th anniversary year. Now, with Series 17, or at least a half broadcast in 2013, you do get the sense that they were saving a lot of their energy for the 50th anniversary special, with some stories being a bit meh. Hyde, though, is one of the better stories from what everyone seems to be calling Series 7B. Now, I'm not quite sure why I like this one. I think it's partly because of the performances. This was Jenna Coleman's first story to be shot, and already her and Matt Smith have an on-screen chemistry that just works. If you take out all the impossible girl who are you mystery bullshit, I prefer the dynamics between the 11th Doctor and Clara Oswald to the dynamic that we then got between the 12th Doctor and Clara Oswald, which is why part of me wishes Matt Smith could have stayed for another year, but anyway. Good supporting performances too. The locations look great, a nice atmosphere and build-up of tension, especially when the Doctor is left stranded in a pocket universe, along with some interesting slower moments, and finally a nice twist ending to add some new flavour to the plot without seeming out of place. I think it's alright. Another story I think is alright is the Sontaran Experiment. I fully understand why this one escapes attention to some extent, as it is sandwiched by two iconic serials, those being The Ark in Space and Genesis of the Daleks. Compared to those stories, it's nothing too special, but for a middle of the run vanilla episodes, it's pretty intense at times, with Sarah Jane and other characters being tortured by Sontaran, brilliantly realised, as in The Time Warrior, by Kevin Lindsay, who soldiered on despite a heart condition that would ultimately claim his life soon after the story was made. Tom Baker is also great, despite being new to the role and breaking his collarbone during filming, although were it not for the obvious stuntman filling in during the sword fights at the end, you'd probably never guess. A testament surely to the man's contribution. Try it and see what you think. The next modern story on the list is Boomtown. Now, I like pretty much every single episode from Series 1. I think the Aliens of London two-parter in particular is pretty awesome because of the way Russell T Davies updated the concept of alien invasion to reflect more realistically how the real world would react in the 21st century, even if, yes, the Slovene are a bit silly. But while Aliens of London is the first time this had happened in Doctor Who, and I do like it, the formula would later be better refined in stories such as Army of Ghosts, for example. But the main reason that the Slovene sequel Boomtown is here on the list instead is because I love how it slows the pace right down. It's one of those subdued bottle episodes that, due to necessity, relies most on character as opposed to pretty bright action and large-scale effects. A nice touch, and a brave thing to do in between two very large and ambitious two-parters, even if, as mentioned, the crew didn't have a choice. Annette Badland's character really benefits from the extra exploration and development here, because thanks to this episode, the character of Blomfell Foch, who's to a certain extent underused in Aliens of London, has now become one of the most iconic characters from the early days of the modern run. There's also some good laughs, counterbalanced extremely well with the main moral dilemma of the episode concerning the morality of capital punishment. The scenes where she has dinner with the Ninth Doctor sum all this up very well, neatly demonstrating just why I'm so fond of this episode.
As a final resort, the excess poison can be exhaled through the lungs.
That's better. Next up, may I suggest the Rich Man's Orphan 55, The Mysterious Planet. This four-parter serves as the introduction to the Trial of a Time Lord series, and while the plot arc perhaps doesn't work as well as here as it did in Mind Warp, with there being too many interjections tacked onto an unrelated story for their own sake, I have fond feelings for this serial, which ultimately ended up as the final full story ever written by the ubiquitous Robert Holmes. This was the first Sixth Doctor story I ever saw, and I would say it is a great place to start if you're not familiar with him. It certainly isn't Holmes' finest story, but that's only because of the impossibly high bar set by previous stories, which are generally regarded by many, myself included, as the best of classic Who. Holmes was a god. Even here, however, there's some great ideas, and Holmes is still the king of writing great dialogue, the sort of lines actors would kill to say because they're so good. The dialogue here doesn't disappoint, being funny, beautiful, pathetic and profound sometimes all at once. It's a bit light, with very few scares or dark moments that equal those in Brian Holmes' efforts, but the drama and tension does ramp up towards the denouement. Oh, and you know how Robert Holmes had a thing for writing duos? Well, here he gives us not one, but two awesome double acts who are just a joy to behold. The Mysterious Planet is in some ways Robert Holmes' greatest hit. Above all, it's just fun to watch, even if the Doctor does get knocked out a bit too frequently. Our next number on the list is the Lazarus Experiment from Series 3 of New Who. By the standards of the RTD era, I suppose it's a somewhat run-of-the-mill story, but it's an episode close to my heart, and although I don't watch it often, it's always a special occasion when I do. It always gives me that nostalgic, warm feeling inside. I remember first watching this story when it came out. I just got hooked on the show, and this is one of my earliest memories of watching Doctor Who live. I'll never forget how frightened I was by the monster, just its large mouth and roar, its sheer size and agility. For a 5-year-old, it was pretty strong stuff. Okay, maybe I was easily impressed by special effects in those days, but rewatching more recently only made me more confident that the direction of this episode is something special, particularly with the final scene in the church and the conversations between Lazarus and the Doctor, for example. As I say, it's not the most complex or unique story, but that's not to say it isn't poignant, or a nice tribute to the classic sci-fi trope of the mad master scientist who tries to conquer nature with disastrous results. And now the choice on this list that I'm the least certain about, but when I got round to watching Season 8 in its entirety, seeing many of the stories for the first time, one of the stories I enjoyed the most was Megalos. I'm not sure whether or not that's because it's a simpler plot that's easy to understand and get into, but I don't think there's enough story in the Doctor Who canon quite like it. It may not be the most complicated story, but it's still very fun to watch, and also features some great performances, most of all from Tom Baker. It can't be easy playing two characters at once and giving the impression they're both different, but Tom manages it very well. The whole idea of someone stealing the Doctor's identity is both intriguing and well executed, even if that someone does happen to be a cactus plant for no conceivable reason. The last two stories on the list are, to my mind, very good examples of my favourite facet of Doctor Who. The side that, while sometimes making you laugh, is not afraid to head in a darker direction if it suits the story. First up, a controversial story from the mid-1980s called Vengeance on Varos. For me, it's up there with the Caves of Androzani and Revelation of the Daleks as 80s Who at its best. Plus a great example of how to do social commentary in Doctor Who properly. The central concept of how violence has become a form of entertainment was prescient then thanks to the rise of so-called video nasties, and is to some extent still prescient now. It's a more grown-up story that I wouldn't necessarily recommend to younger kids, but that's only because the observations on society might go over their heads, and not because it's too graphic or violent as some have suggested. In fact, it's no more violent than other stuff kids are used to nowadays, and its dark, gritty feel is integral to the story. Oh, and Colin Baker did not push the chap into the acid bath. He is completely innocent. And anyway, that can't be acid because it isn't steaming, and the guards who fell and dragged each other in, by the way, were not hideously deformed. They just went a bit red, so that's fine. Elsewhere, Great Alien in the form of Syl, brilliantly realised by Nabil Shaban and the prosthetics team, along with a terrific script from Philip Martin, make this a well worthwhile watch. It's so different to other Doctor Who stories, but that's surely the unique selling point of Doctor Who. Certainly why I love this gem.
No sign of life, sir.
Dead as death.
How long should I hold?
And cut it now.
And now the main reason I made this list, and perhaps the contentious choice that will provoke the most argument, so get your pitchforks out now. I'm talking about what might very well be my favourite story from the Capaldi era, and certainly my favourite story from Series 9 of the modern run. I am, of course, talking about Sleep No More. Now, maybe with the exception of the Chibnall era to a lesser extent, I don't think I've seen a story that polarised the fanbase quite so heavily. Okay, maybe Kill the Moon, but I've seen as many people praise this as utterly tear it to shreds. I will say that it is one of those stories that requires repeat viewings in order for it to make sense, and I'll concede that its plot, while full of good ideas concerning mad scientists and aliens made out of sleep dust, is maybe not the most watertight. You might consider this an understatement if you hate the episode. But to me, it represents the side of Doctor Who I like the most, but we don't see so often. The dark, experimental, original side. I love the way it's shot and directed. I love the performances, especially from Peter Capaldi and Reece Shearsmith. And I love the way that, thanks to the found footage aspect, monsters appear either not clearly or straight in our face, which adds to their impact. Oh, and the scene where Deepando is baking the computer but it asks him to do the song. Oh, and that ending! The way it ends on a big question mark, and that horrifying final shot only to be ruined by the Next Time trailer. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it doesn't need to be. I love Sleep No More, and I can't get enough of it, so shoot me, stuff it. So, that's my list, but of course it's just my personal opinion. If you happen to have any stories that you enjoy and think should have been in this video, please drop a line in the comments and tell me how nasty a criminal I am. I'd be interested to hear what other people think. Let's have a debate, or at least try to do so and keep it civilised. Not much else to say here, other than thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe the video if you enjoyed it. It apparently helps our channel grow, so I've heard, or something. Stay tuned for more Who-related discussion here on Cynical Who. But for now, goodbye!